and his behaviour in the week leading up to his death made suicide seem unlikely.
I last spoke to him on the Friday, just a week before it happened. Talked to him at length on the phone, and he was absolutely normal and enthusiastic, talking particularly about going to the Bon Jovi concert the following day with you.
Which is when last time I saw him. He was taking me to a Bon Jovi concert in Hyde Park on Saturday as an early birthday present. Spent the whole day with him, and he was absolutely his normal self.
Stephen spent the Sunday before his death skydiving at Netheravon Airfield, near the Army College where he and Ruth were studying.
On the Monday, we went to Alton Towers for the day. It was a treat that I gave him to go to Alton Towers, and we had a really, really good day. I think we were probably the last people to leave the park because we were just having great fun. The last time I actually saw Steve, we drove out of the main gate and he turned right to go north to Lincoln and I turned left to go back down to Swindon.
Stephen drove 100 miles to Hibblestow Airfield in North Lincolnshire for the skydiving competition. Those closest to him said he was acting normally and seemed happy, not behaving like someone contemplating suicide. This supported the police theory that he'd been murdered. But who would want to kill him?
What we needed to do was have a minute-by-minute look at where he was and what he was doing, in the hope that that would give us the answer as to why Stephen died. Was he involved in criminality? Had he offended somebody? Or was he the victim of some lone lunatic? Did he have a secret life? Did he have a secret lover? We were looking at all possibilities.
Detectives retraced the days before Stephen's death and found that he'd driven 11 miles to a petrol station, Kirk's Corner, on the previous Tuesday. Why he'd gone there was a mystery. There were other garages far closer to the airfield.
To find the place, you would really either come across it by accident or have to go and look for it. And we wondered why Stephen was there. What was he doing? Was he meeting somebody? Was it a friend, associate, a skydiver? We do know that he bought some provisions at the store there. And when we recovered Stephen's car, it had virtually no petrol in it at all. So again, we wondered why, had he gone to the garage, why didn't he fill his car with petrol?
The following day, Stephen made his first skydive of the week. Police knew that his parachute must have been sabotaged sometime after that jump.
He might have packed his rig on the Wednesday. He might have got somebody else to pack it for him. There are plenty of packers in the sport who make their living packing other people's parachutes.
Stephen's kit was believed to have been left in the kit room, and there has been a great deal of debate about how secure that place was. My understanding is it wasn't very secure.
We make the kit store available to everyone. It's locked and alarmed at the end of the day, but nobody ever expects somebody to come along and cause any damage to your parachute. Skydivers trust each other. We have to.
There were over 70 competitors from all over the country, and all had access to the kit room. Stephen's team was called Black Rain.
The three members of Black Rain, Stephen, David and Adrian, I didn't know them particularly well, and I've got to say that they didn't really stand out.
During the evenings, the students spent time socialising in the airfield bar.
One or two of the witnesses that we did see just simply couldn't remember what happened because they'd drunk so much alcohol and were unable to remember where they were, let alone Stephen.
On Thursday, Stephen went to Scunthorpe to buy his outfit for the fancy dress party at the airfield that night.
Everyone had quite a lot to drink. We were all in fancy dress, dressed up as women, and sing karaoke, sing lots of songs together. Steve seemed to be his normal self at the party. He was in a good mood, loud and lively. The party finished quite late. Everyone made their way off. I think Steve slept in his car and I slept in my car.
Stephen's fatal jump was the next day. He fell to his death at 2:30 p.m. police turned to skydiving and forensic experts for advice on how to gather the evidence.
Humberside Police got in touch with the Forensic Science Service, and the advice given was to go for DNA on the cut ends of the straps. Whoever's cut the straps would have been handling them in some way, and we were hoping that that would have left DNA on the straps, and that by swabbing them we could have picked that DNA up and got a profile.
The scientists' aim was to find a match between DNA found on the cut straps and DNA taken from the skydivers on the day.
Everyone who was at that jump were kept behind, and their DNA swabs were taken from them. Essentially, if we'd got any sort of result from the straps, we could speed up the process of eliminating people, because we'd have all their samples straight away.
So far, the police operation had run smoothly. But a misunderstanding over a pair of scissors was to have serious implications for the investigation.
The scissors that I was given to actually take the samples with, cut the samples, were old, and they were moving, they wouldn't cut it properly. So that's when we decided to use a hook knife.
From this, the police wrongly concluded that the saboteur must also have used a knife.
We were told at the scene on that evening that scissors could not cut the straps. So at that stage, we concentrated our efforts on implements that we thought could cut the straps.
It could have been misinterpreted by the police that I meant that it couldn't be cut by scissors. It couldn't be cut by the pair of scissors I had. Obviously, the brand new pair of scissors, that webbing could be cut.
But the confusion wasn't spotted at the time. So when they searched Stephen's car, they missed the significance of a crucial piece of evidence.
We found a pair of scissors in his car boot. These were normal domestic scissors, which on the face of it didn't appear to be capable of causing the damage to the straps. Bear in mind that we'd been told that Stephen's rig could not be cut by scissors.
The scissors weren't seen as a priority for forensic examination. Meanwhile, the police were concentrating on making contact with the 5,000 skydivers across the UK. Colin Andrews believed that a murderer might well have spoken to one of them about the crime.
We sent a personal letter to every skydiver in the country. We did a Crime Watch programme where an appeal was made to millions of people. We used the internet site, we used local newspaper. This case was in the media every single day.
The grieving parents of murdered skydiver Stephen Hilder today made an emotional appeal for help in finding his killer.
We're living through every parent's worst nightmare. We're only here today in the hope that somebody can help the police to progress things to a point where we can bring Steve home and grieve for him in private.
We had no desire to share our grief and so on in a public at all. It's a dreadful thing to be doing. But the police were convinced that it's one way of triggering people who know something to come forward and provide information.
But despite all the publicity, there were no new leads. And there was further bad news from the forensics lab. There was no single clear DNA profile on the cut straps.
There's DNA from a number of people there, and once you get that sort of mixture, it's impossible to pick out individuals from it within that mixture. It means that at some point a number of people have handled those straps.
The hope of solving the crime on DNA evidence had drawn a blank. But 3 months after Stephen's death, the police thought they had their breakthrough.
We can reveal that 2 friends of skydiver Stephen Hilder have been arrested in connection with his death.
After a 9-month murder investigation into Stephen Hilder's death, police made a sudden announcement to the media.
The story appears to be heading for a new and dramatic twist. Perhaps it was Stephen himself who sabotaged his own parachutes.
It was clearly very difficult when the emphasis of the investigation switched from murder to possibly suicide, and we weren't surprised that the media picked up on that very strongly.
Those who knew Stephen best didn't believe that this video footage filmed immediately before his death could possibly be someone contemplating suicide.
He was okay. That was Steve. There was absolutely nothing there to suggest that he knew what was about to happen.
To me, Steve seemed perfectly normal before the jump, how he had been on like lots of other jumps before.
I've watched that tape over and over again, and I've looked into his eyes, and even after suggestions of suicide and everything, I can't see anything. That's just Steve. That's just Steve, being normal, like he always was.
We saw nothing that would give a hint of any change in his character. We don't believe it is in his character, so we're of the view that he did not take his own life.
When the inquest opened in March 2005, police were convinced that none of the earlier suspects was guilty of murder, and that Stephen had taken his own life.
I was satisfied and sure at the end of this investigation that nobody else was involved in Stephen's death.
There were a number of factors which lent weight to the theory that Stephen had committed suicide. First, there were his debts.
Steve was always very conscious of the fact that he was no good with money. It was like water in his hands. So although we weren't aware of the level of debt that he'd got himself into, we weren't surprised that he was in debt.
Stephen owed around £17,000.
I was actually really surprised when it was suggested that he may have committed suicide because of his debt, because he didn't seem that worried about it, and he was just like, yeah, no, it's fine, I'll get it sorted.
The coroner, I remember, clearly expressed the view that the level of debt, in fact, was not much greater than the national student average.
He knew that he was going to be in the military. He knew that that was a job for life. He knew that, you know, with that sort of security behind him, wherever he was financially at that time, he would be able to fix it in the long run.
Secondly, Stephen was having difficulties academically. He'd failed some of his first-year exams.
I can't believe that he would kill himself because of his exams, because he knew how well he'd done, and he'd actually been thinking about it and had come up with like a plan for what he wanted to do instead.
Stephen was considering a transfer to the Royal Navy.
He was certainly very positive about his career and the direction it was going in, despite considering perhaps a switch to the Navy, but it's still within the armed forces and the sort of life that he wanted to lead and the sort of things he wanted to do.
And third, the coroner heard that Stephen's relationship with his girlfriend was coming to an end. But at the inquest, she refuted suggestions that this might have caused him to have suicidal thoughts.
It wasn't a really serious relationship. It was just a casual thing you have at university. Sort of, we were doing the play together for most of the time, so we see each other like at least twice a week for rehearsals. Never saw him at weekends because he was always skydiving. We didn't really need each other all the time. He wasn't obsessed with me or anything like that. He wasn't needy. He wasn't demanding of my time or anything.
In any situation such as this, you'd expect personal relationships to be looked into to some extent. So, yes, it was a factor, but it was not one that was considered to be so overwhelming as to justify someone taking their own life.
And Stephen's conversion to Catholicism at the age of 17 meant that his religious beliefs weren't compatible with suicide.
He was extraordinarily passionate about the fact that he was a recent convert over to that faith, what it actually meant, what limitations that placed on his life, and why that was a good thing.
Jason and Stephen had discussed the obligations imposed on a believer. In the Catholic faith, suicide is a mortal sin.
We did raise the question of suicide, and it was something that Steve was very passionate about, the fact that, you know, what gives you the right to take a life, even if it is your own life.
He did believe, and that, I think, would be something that would steer him away from taking his own life.
Motives for suicide were looking far from certain. The coroner called Peter Grant, the forensic expert on the case.
The coroner made it clear that he'd left my evidence to the end, as mine was the only evidence that could be interpreted as pointing towards suicide, and he wanted to hear everything